to climate change education, engagement, and advocacy. Today, I will be presenting the science, impacts, and solutions related to the climate crisis. So to start, I'd like to share some guidelines for this webinar. We will be sharing a lot of information, so I recommend taking notes. If you have any questions, please submit them in the chat box and they will be addressed following the presentation. We will also be sharing polls throughout the webinar. If you joined in via cell phone, you can type your answer to the poll in the chat box. Slides and resources will be shared after the presentation. This webinar is also being recorded and it will be shared with you all via email as well. Lastly, if we experience any technical difficulties during this webinar, I ask you to please remain on the call as we resolve the issue. And with that, we're ready to get started. At the CLEO Institute, we like I'm sorry, I think there was an issue there. At CLEO, we like to begin presentations by sharing this image. The official title of this picture is Blue Marble, and it is one of the most reproduced images in human history. And it is particularly relevant this week as we celebrate the 50th anniversary of Earth Day. This picture was taken in 1972 as the Apollo 17 mission traveled to the moon. And when it was published and released, it was the first time that people were able to see the entirety of the planet that they lived on. And they were able to see the beauty, the fragility, and the unique qualities of this planet. This week, we're celebrating the 50th anniversary of Earth Day. Earth Day was founded in 1970, and the initiative was led by a senator, a Democrat from Wisconsin by the name of Gaylord Nelson. And he was inspired by the anti-Vietnam War protests of the 1960s. So he had this idea to do a national teach-in on the environment. And he corralled a lot of people. And when the first Earth Day was celebrated, 20 million people around the United States rallied to raise awareness about what was going on in the climate. Even so, Congress went into recess so its members could speak to their constituents on Earth Day events. So it really was a holistic effort to raise awareness. And this picture, in collaboration with all of the other efforts by senators, representatives, and the public alike, it led to the creation of many important things. It led to the Clean Air Act, the Water Quality Improvement Act, Endangered Species Act, and the Environmental Protection Agency. So in that spirit, that's the theme that we're going with today as we celebrate Earth Week and learn more about the climate crisis and what we can do about it. In order to understand the climate crisis, first we have to understand what climate actually is. Climate refers to the average weather conditions over a long period of time. In contrast, weather refers to the atmosphere over a short period of time. A simple way of understanding this difference is thinking about your clothing. Weather tells you what to wear that day. If it's raining, you may choose a rain jacket. Right? If it's sunny, you may choose a short sleeve shirt. Climate, on the other hand, it tells you what types of clothing you have in your closet. If you live in a warm climate like South Florida, for example, you probably own very few coats or boots. Now that we've defined what climate is, we need to define the greenhouse gas effect in order to understand how climate is regulated on Earth. In simple terms, the greenhouse gas effect is the way that energy passes through Earth's atmosphere. If we take a look at the image on your screen, you can see that the sun releases sunlight, demonstrated by the yellow waves. This sunlight enters Earth's atmosphere, demonstrated by the blue thin line surrounding Earth. The Earth's surface absorbs this sunlight and reflects it back into space as heat, or infrared waves, demonstrated by the red arrows. Now, the atmosphere does not allow all this heat to enter outer space. and instead traps some of it through the use of greenhouse gases. You may have heard that term before, greenhouse gases, but what are they? Greenhouse gases are heat-trapping gases, like carbon dioxide, methane, and fluorinated gases. In a normal scenario, the greenhouse gas effect is a good thing because it maintains a favorable temperature on Earth that is necessary for life. Without the greenhouse gas effect, the Earth would be a frozen tundra. However, human industry has increased the concentration of greenhouse gases in our atmosphere, thus increasing the heat trapping capacity of our atmosphere and making the planet warmer. That's where we get the term global warming. And so now we're going to cue the first poll. And in a few moments, you're going to see the first poll come up on your screen. It's going to be a question, and you're going to select your answer. For those of you who are not connected on our desktops and may not be able to see the poll and respond to the poll, just type in your answer in the chat box. So if we could release that poll now. And we'll give you a few moments to choose your answer. All right, just a few seconds more, and we're going to close the poll. All right. So that poll referenced the scientific consensus. So for those of you who have heard people say that they're not sure climate science is real because there is no scientific consensus, it's not true. Multiple studies published in peer-reviewed scientific journals show that 97% or more of actively publishing climate scientists agree that climate warming trends over the past century are extremely likely due to human activities. Our scientific community is telling us our planet is on fire. What we do today will determine the future of the next generations to come. So as I mentioned before, the increase of greenhouse gas emissions is making our planet warmer. But where do these greenhouse gases come from? They mostly come from the burning of fossil fuels, which include oil, coal, and natural gas. The extraction, refinement, and burning of these fuels releases greenhouse gases, such as carbon dioxide. Our agricultural industry is another large polluter, as is our transportation industry and our production of goods, like plastic and textiles. Right, so now we're going to cue poll 2 in advance of the next slide. And again, submit your answers either in the chat box or on screen. And tell us if you've heard somebody say that climate change isn't a threat, that the climate has always changed and we're just in a cycle. We'll give you a few moments to do that. Okay, just a few moments more. Okay, we're going to close the poll now. So for those of you who said that you have heard somebody say that climate change isn't a threat, the climate has always changed and we're just in a cycle, this slide is very important to understand and will give you the answer to that question. This chart on your screen measures carbon dioxide levels over the last 800,000 years. As you can see, the line on the chart fluctuates up and down over the time period. The high points on the chart indicate periods of relative warmth, while the low points on the chart indicate periods of relative cold, such as ice ages. For millennia, atmospheric carbon dioxide had never been above 300 parts per million, which is indicated by the dashed red line. In 1950, the atmosphere crossed the threshold of 300 parts per million, and the concentration of carbon dioxide has been increasing since, fueled largely by human industry after the Industrial Revolution. We can now measure 413 parts per million as of February 2020. That is the highest concentration that humankind has ever seen. There are two takeaways from this chart. One is that the climate does vary naturally through factors like solar activity, volcanic eruptions, and changes in the Earth's orbit and tilt. So yes, the climate has always changed. However, human activity has pushed carbon dioxide concentrations beyond the natural cycle. So we cannot accurately say that we're in a natural cycle anymore. So the planet is warming, and we know that ice melts when it warms. There's a difference between land ice and sea ice melting. Land ice includes ice sheets and glaciers. When it melts, it adds to the volume of water in the ocean, directly increasing sea level. Sea ice, on the other hand, includes frozen seawater and icebergs. When it melts, it does not directly add to sea level rise because it's already in the sea. However, it opens up more dark ocean, allowing the surface of the planet to absorb more heat and further encouraging the melting of ice. This is what is called a positive feedback loop, but there isn't much positive about it. We're now going to cue poll 3. And again, on your screen, you're going to submit the answer, and we'll give you a few moments to do that. And this poll is going to test your knowledge of sea level rise and to see which state is most vulnerable to sea level rise in the United States. All right, just a few more seconds. Okay, we're going to close the poll now. And for those that answered Florida, you would be correct. Florida is the state that is most at risk of sea level rise effects in the entire country. Sea level rise is a result of thermal expansion and land ice melt. Thermal expansion is the way that water molecules expand when they are heating. In South Florida, we can expect at least 2 feet of sea level rise by 2050. Even more, by 2100, a rise of as much or more than 8 to 10 feet cannot be ruled out. It's a strong possibility that we'll see these levels. Sea level rise poses many social and economic problems for South Florida and intensifies hurricanes and saltwater intrusion. If you look at the image on your screen, this shows how Miami-Dade County looks like today. The picture to the right of that shows Miami-Dade County with 8 feet of sea level rise. If you live in this county, think about where your neighborhood is. Will your area be affected? In South Florida and many other coastal areas around the world, sea level rise brings a problem called saltwater intrusion. South Florida depends on clean drinking water from freshwater aquifers below us. As the sea level rises, seawater from underneath and from the east push against the freshwater. This saltwater intrusion will contaminate our freshwater and threaten our drinking water. The fact that we live in a limestone bedrock makes this worse because limestone is porous and allows water to flow through it. Sure, we can remove the salt water from the freshwater supply, but this is a very expensive process, and many cities do not have the funds or capacity to keep up with water demands through desalination. Climate change also exacerbates extreme weather. As the planet gets warmer, so does the water in the ocean. That warmer ocean water acts as fuel for hurricanes. This will lead to stronger hurricanes, heavier rain, and a higher storm surge. Extreme weather brings health impacts such as injuries, fatalities, anxiety, and post-traumatic stress on communities. The image on your screen shows a picture from Hurricane Dorian last year that destroyed the Bahamas. This is a weather event worsened by climate change. We're going to cue poll 4 now, and we want to know how many of you have lived through a hurricane and have experienced a hurricane for yourself. Give you a few more seconds. All right, we're going to cue the poll, and I imagine that most of you have lived through a hurricane. So climate change is going to impact all of us. Fortunately, the planet has natural solutions for climate change through the use of carbon sinks and carbon sources. These are natural reservoirs that absorb carbon dioxide from our atmosphere. This includes our land. The forests on our planet and other places of vegetation absorb massive amounts of carbon dioxide through biological processes. Preserving forests helps us capture carbon dioxide, while cutting down forests releases all the carbon dioxide that they had stored in their roots. The United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization estimates that 18 million acres of forest are lost each year to agriculture, forestry, and other land uses. Beef production is actually the leading cause of deforestation. Cows belch out methane, a greenhouse gas that is 25 times more potent at trapping heat than carbon dioxide. The fires we saw in the Amazon recently were largely due to clearing forests to make space for cows. Now we're going to release our last poll, which is going to test your knowledge of deforestation and beef production. I'm going to give you a few seconds. We want to know a meat-centric diet is responsible for how much in terms of percentage of global emissions? Okay, let's close the poll. And for those of you that answered 25%, you are correct. A meat-centric diet is responsible for 25% of global emissions. And that's because meat production requires a lot of resources. Oceans are another carbon sink. In fact, they are our largest carbon sinks. Oceans have absorbed about 93% of excess heat caused by greenhouse gases. Unfortunately, oxygen concentrations are declining as they absorb too much carbon dioxide. Oceans currently absorb more than a quarter of their carbon dioxide, which causes ocean acidification and a decline in corals. As you can see in the image on your screen, corals are bleaching and dying. These corals are important because they provide habitats for countless marine species, aid in oxygen production, and they are our first lines of defense against intense storms. As the planet warms with climate change, we're going to feel the heat. Extreme heat will increase the cases of heat stroke and cardiovascular failure. Extreme heat also increases air pollution, which worsens asthma cases and cardiovascular disease. In addition, extreme heat worsens vector-borne diseases. These are diseases that are carried by small organisms like mosquitoes or ticks. The spread of diseases like Zika, dengue, and Lyme disease would increase with more extreme heat. The graphic on the right of your screen shows that by 2050, experts predict Miami will experience 6 times as many days of extreme heat days. This will become more dangerous and will largely affect people who work and play outside. Food is also going to become more expensive with climate change. As temperatures change, growth rates of many crops will decrease. As growth rates decrease, then prices increase because it is harder to grow food and there's less food overall. By 2030, 9 out of the 10 major crops are predicted to experience reduced or stagnant growth rates. I want you to take a moment to think how old you will be in 2030. How will increased prices affect you? Climate change isn't just about humans. Animals will feel it too. Experts say we are already in Earth's sixth mass extinction. A mass extinction is a major die-off of species. And we are experiencing the worst wave of species die-offs since the loss of the dinosaurs 65 million years ago. In fact, 1 million species are at risk of extinction in the next few decades. When we lose animals, we lose all the roles that they play on our planet. From nutrient cycling to population control, animals are the foundation of many of the natural processes we depend on. Just recently, we lost 1 billion animals due to the widespread bushfires in Australia. These fires are a climate-driven event. Climate change will impact some communities more than others. For example, saltwater intrusion will especially affect people of disadvantaged communities. This is because drinking water will become more expensive, and it will make it harder for communities of low wealth to afford safe drinking water in South Florida. Also, disadvantaged communities will feel the heat. As the planet gets warmer, our days in Miami will get hotter. Miami-Dade currently does not require air conditioning units in affordable public housing. Many people also rely on public transportation, walking, and biking. It will not be safe to continue living in those standards with such extreme heat. If you look at the image on your screen, I want you to take a moment to think about what's wrong with this picture, especially as it relates to extreme heat. This bench doesn't have any shade. In 2015, 197 countries signed on to the Paris Accord, which was a global agreement to reduce greenhouse gases and limit warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius or 2.7 degrees Fahrenheit. Climate change will likely reach 1.5 degrees Celsius between 2030 and 2052. The world is currently on track for about 3 degrees of warming by 2100 if we don't make major reductions in greenhouse gas emissions. We must keep our global warming at 1.5 degrees Celsius, or we could set off the catastrophic effects of climate change. This means ending the burning of fossil fuels as soon as possible. To date, the United States is the only country that has pulled out of the Paris Accord, which is unfortunate given the fact that the United States is the second largest emitter of greenhouse gases in the world. And we are first when we look at emissions per person on a per capita basis. The United States has an important role in reducing greenhouse gases globally to help fight climate change. We must take responsibility for our pollution. Here is the good news. We have the solutions to fight climate change. Solutions can be in the form of mitigation, which addresses the causes of climate change, or adaptation, which is adapting to the effects of climate change. An example of mitigation would be solar panels, avoiding the burning of fossil fuels from the start. An example of adaptation would be seawalls, protecting us from the impacts of sea level rise. A growth mindset is also a solution. We need to be willing to grow and change, largely by focusing on the successes from solutions, rather than being discouraged. The solutions in this presentation will be mitigation strategies. These are solutions that directly help fight climate change because they decrease the amount of greenhouse gases we put into the atmosphere. The best way of doing that is to use energy from renewable energies, rather than from burning non-renewable fossil fuels. Solar energy is a renewable energy that captures energy from the sun. Because we live in the sunshine state and receive plenty of sun, solar energy is a great option for us in Florida. We throw away about 40% of all the food we produce. When we throw away food, we throw away the energy it takes to make it. In fact, we throw away so much food that if food waste were a country, it would be the world's third largest carbon polluter. This includes the energy it takes to grow, raise, ship, refrigerate, and package food. Also, when food ends up in the landfill, it releases methane, which traps 25 times more heat than carbon dioxide. We need to do our best to reduce our food waste in general. Instead of throwing away your food, add it to the compost. Meal planning and eating leftover food are great ways to reduce our food waste on an individual level. On an institutional level, diverting food waste from places like restaurants and large cafeterias would help us reduce the environmental impact. Remember, let's feed people, not landfills. Eating more plant-based meals is also great for the environment. Eating beef and dairy is very unsustainable. Both meat and dairy are big contributors to greenhouse gases and worsen climate change. Also, buying local, seasonal, and organic food whenever possible is a great way to help the environment. These options have a much lower carbon footprint because they do not use certain agricultural techniques and require less transportation to get to the consumers. As you can see on the chart, animal-based proteins like lamb and beef are larger carbon polluters than plant-based proteins like nuts and lentils. Remember how I said that land is a carbon sink? Trees absorb carbon dioxide, and they are one of our best solutions to combating climate change. Trees absorb carbon dioxide, avoid storm runoff, and absorb air pollution. Imagine all the good we can do with more trees. Participate in tree planting whenever possible and advocate for more trees in your community. Of course, we have to mention renewable energy. Florida should be known as the solar state. Solar companies are now the fastest growing job sector in the United States. As a community, we should be encouraging more solar. Our government buildings, for example, could install more solar. We're also seeing more and more car companies releasing hybrid and electric cars. We can ask our local government, for instance, to install more charging stations across the county to make charging them easier and more accessible to a larger group of people. One of the best individual actions you can do is share this information and help your community. You can do this through the CLEO Institute. Join us as we advocate for climate action, contact our elected officials, educate our peers and families about the climate crisis, and create meaningful change in our schools and communities. We intend to educate others about climate change and empower them to act on it. At the end of the day, our elected officials in office are the ones that decide our laws on fossil fuels and climate change. We need to make our voices heard. For more information on how to get involved, you can visit www.cleoinstitute.org. And that concludes the science and impacts part of this presentation. And now I'd like to present to you one of our solutions that CLEO is implementing in Miami-Dade County, and that is through our Climate Resilient Schools program. Climate Resilient Schools program was launched in fall of 2019 through a partnership with Miami-Dade County Public Schools. And so far, CLEO has provided more than 35 presentations across 10 high schools, reaching over 1,000 students and teaching them about climate science and solutions. We also launched something called CLIP, which is the Climate Leadership Information Program in 7 of these 10 high schools, and we certified 50 students as climate speakers. And climate speakers do the same thing that I'm doing here. They present webinars and presentations all over the community and in their schools so we can educate more people on the climate crisis. If you are a teacher on the call who would like to sponsor a CLIP program in your school, there's a contact information on your screen. We are having open enrollment for our 2020 and 2021 school year. So please reach out to us if you'd like to get involved. And now I'd like to pass over the microphone, so to speak, to two very special students. We have one student named Gianna Hutton. She's a student at Palmetto Senior High here in Miami-Dade. And then we also have Leandro de Armas. He's a student at Palmer Trinity Senior High in Miami-Dade as well. And they'd like to share their experience as part of the Climate Resilient Schools program and speak for a few minutes about why they got involved and why they think other students should become more climate literate and advocate.
Hi, my name is Gianna Hunnan, as Julieta mentioned. I'm a sophomore at Miami Palmetto Senior High School. So I was inspired to join CLIP because promptly as I entered the climate movement, I realized there was a saddening amount of people who had no idea what I was talking about. One of the major obstacles you face when defending climate is the lack of awareness in our own community. I found that my family members, my friends, my peers were all clueless about an issue that I was so passionate about. This program not only equips students with the knowledge they need about climate science, but also empowers them to become great citizens. Also, having that climate certification we mentioned, it's a great tool that legitimizes you if you ever want to speak anywhere. For example, I'm going to speak on Earth Day to my mom's students at her elementary school, virtually, of course, about climate science. And having that certification was able to open me up to that amazing opportunity. Since becoming involved in this climate movement, it's empowered me as an individual and a public speaker. I've learned how to express my thoughts effectively and meaningfully through climate activism. I think the youth voice is such a vital part of the climate movement. These are our futures we're defending, our safety, and our families. That's why I believe our role is so important. We're the voice of the generation which this crisis will affect most, which makes us the agents of change. We need to use our voices to enact change in our communities, beginning with educating the public. Thank you so much. If Leonardo wants to speak now, he can.
Hey everyone, I'm Leandro. I'm a junior at Palmer Trinity High School, and I was first introduced to CLEO through the John CLEO's Climate Speakers Network. That's very similar to what's being done through CLIP, which allowed me to undergo a training that certified me as a climate speaker. And I was very interested in this, and I'm very grateful that I was able to take part in this initiative because it enabled me to develop a better understanding of climate science and its interconnectedness. And it also allowed me to become a better communicator and deliver a much more convincing narrative to my peers and to anyone who I could would be able to create discussion with. And shortly after becoming certified, I was able to give my climate presentation to some of my classes, and I was very pleased with the way it went. They were all very engaged, and we were able to foster some really good discussion. And I knew that I wanted to give other students in my school and in my school's environmental action club the opportunity to also become certified climate speakers. Thus, we partnered with CLIP, and through that partnership, we were successfully able to certify some of our members. And we're looking forward to delivering some climate presentations virtually to some classes this week in honor of Earth Day and Earth Week. And overall, it's allowed myself and all those who've taken part in the program to become a lot more comfortable speaking about climate issues and advocating solutions to our peers. And this presentation acts also as a really strong resource that has enabled us also to develop a really strong narrative where, regardless of whether we have the presentation in front of us or not, we're able to much more convincingly talk to others about climate, advocate for solutions and the kind of change that we need to see. And in this way, it's allowed all those who've taken part in this program to become much better leaders and just become a lot more comfortable again in our own skin and talking about climate change, which we're clearly very passionate about.
Thank you so much. Gianna and Leandro are two of our stellar students as part of this program. And again, if you're a teacher who would like to sponsor the CLIP program, please contact the email on your screen. It's gabriella@cleoinstitute.org. We'd love to have your school be a part of this program and really expand climate literacy and advocacy throughout Miami-Dade County. And on that note, I'd like to pass over the microphone virtually as well to a very special person. Dane Jaber is the instructional supervisor and the district program coordinator at Miami-Dade County Public Schools. And he'd like to say a few words about CLEO's partnership with MDCPS and the Florida Science Standards.
Hi, thank you so much. Glad to be here with all of you. I think I saw about 75 people last time I saw the participant list, and I'm happy to be here. Thank you for the CLEO Institute for inviting me to speak today, as well as being a fantastic partner with us as a school system. So I heard a lot of great climate science, and one of the things that we are challenged with as the public school system is identifying where certain current topics like climate change and sea level rise fit into what we already do in schools with our state standards. So across elementary school, middle school, and high school, we have been identifying already existing topics, often that are around ecology, carbon cycle, human impact on the environment, and other topics that we're already teaching, and seeing how we can use some of the resources, whether they're from the CLEO Institute or elsewhere within our curriculum, to support the passion for learning about climate science that we heard from a lot of our CLIP presenters, as well as joining them in the effort of educating and informing everybody and making sure that all students in Miami-Dade County Public Schools have the opportunity to learn about some of this critical science.
Thank you so much, Zane. And now we're going to pass it over to the question and answer sessions. Thank you so much for tuning into this presentation. If you have any questions for Dane or for Gianna and Leandro about their CLIP experience, or questions about the science, the impacts, the solutions, thoughts about how to take on Earth Week, now is the time to do so. And once we're done with the Q&A, I'm going to share a couple of more resources that the CLEO Institute has to allow you to learn more about climate science as well as get involved. So please type any questions you have into the chat box.
Just make sure you address the questions to the Ask Questions Here co-host with the CLEO logo.
Thank you, Olivia. And we'll give you all a few moments.
So we have a first question here is, could you please talk about how sunscreen impacts our coral reef?
Sure. Thank you so much for the question. So we know that reef-safe sunscreen is an important way to protect our coral reefs. However, the largest threat that our coral reefs are having is rising temperatures of the oceans. So on a scale, in terms of magnitude, the most important thing we can do to preserve our coral reefs is mitigate global warming, because corals get very stressed in high temperatures, and the more our ocean temperatures rise, the more stressed they're going to be, and the more likely it is that our coral reef ecosystems are going to collapse. So it is very important to keep that as center and front of mind, but also whenever possible, do use reef safe sunscreen, because that's going to be much better for their health.
Thank you, Julieta. I have another question here from Vanessa, who's asking if there are any volunteering opportunities for college students. Perhaps you'd like to elaborate a little bit on the Gen CLEO group that we have.
Sure. So thank you, Vanessa, for your question and for tuning in today. We have a lot of opportunities for college students to get involved. After this webinar is over, I'll send an email with links and resources for applicable programs, but in particular, that's going to be our Gen CLEO program. So Gen CLEO is short for Generation CLEO, and that empowers middle school, high school, and university students, as well as all of their teachers and parents that support students, to become climate advocates. And during this week, we are having a lot of opportunities to learn and become advocates in their community. We also have a fun essay and video contest that I can share with you all after. But in essence, the theme is, in honor of Earth Day's 50th anniversary, what would you like to tell the world? And that essay or video It's very short. Videos are less than a minute, and essays are less than 250 words, and they're due April 24, this Friday, to our info@cleoinstitute.org email. And remember, I'll share all of this through email. And we really want to hear more about what students want to say. We also have lots of events on our website. We have different webinars and ways for them to continue learning. We have monthly Gen CLEO meetings where we network and get to know each other and think of ways that we can influence our community for the better. In terms of traditional volunteering opportunities, we have had to put a pause on those in order to comply with safety standards as a result of the coronavirus pandemic. But we look forward to continuing that once the safety restrictions are lifted in the future. So please get involved with Gen CLEO. For anybody on the line, we have a statewide program, and it's really exciting to see all of the things that they've been able to do. They've spoken at commissioner meetings, at Miami-Dade County School Board meetings. They've held climate strikes and climate events. They hold climate lectures.
Thank you, Julieta. We have several more questions. The next one is from Marvin, who's asking, what is the biggest thing that CLEO is trying to promote for clean energy?
Sure. So thank you again for your question. In terms of clean energy, we really want to encourage people to first educate themselves on what clean energy is and why it's so important to make the transition. And once they are aware of why we should do it, really advocate for ways to do it. So there are different campaigns locally, regionally, and statewide in order to increase access to renewable energies. So if you have more questions on how to get involved or how to contact elected officials or what to contact them about, please send us an email to info@cleoinstitute.org and we can channel you into those resources. We have several program coordinators that specifically reach out to elected officials on issues of renewable energy.
Great, thank you. Our next question is asking if you have any other ideas of individual solutions that we can do to help the climate.
My goodness, the solutions really are limitless, and it really depends on how creative and how committed you are to doing this. So on a small scale, individuals, we can do a lot of things. So just like we can do composting, we can incorporate more plant-based meals into our diets, we can reduce our energy consumption, we can move away from single-use plastics because plastics are made from petroleum. And so if we reduce the amount of single-use plastics we purchase, we reduce the demand for petroleum. So there are a lot of things that we can do on an individual level in our homes. We can also do things on a community level. One of the things that CLEO advocates for is community resiliency, right? Because the community is only as resilient as its most vulnerable people. And so lifting people up is a great way to encourage community resiliency in the face of climate change. So reaching out to your neighbors, for instance, we're going to start hurricane season soon. And for much of South Florida and Florida as a whole, hurricane season is a huge threat. And there are many people that are underprepared for hurricane season. So reaching out to your neighbors is a great way to encourage that. Also reaching out to your neighbors and talking and starting the conversation about climate science. All of the studies that we look at in terms of communications, they show that people are worried about climate change as a whole, but not everyone is talking about it. And so even sharing something that you learned today, or even sending a message to people that you care about and saying, it's Earth Week, here are a couple of resources. You can share the CLEO calendar. We have lots of webinars coming up this week, and really starting that conversation about how people can get involved. And again, if you have more questions about specific things that we can do, definitely reach out to us. Always, become civically engaged, attend commission meetings whenever possible. Those don't have enough attendance, and your attendance at a commission meeting is so important. So find out when your next commission meeting is. Some municipalities are doing them virtually as a result of the pandemic, or when the pandemic is over, really reach out to community organizations and civic organizations to find out how to get more civically involved.
Thank you, Julieta. Our next question is from Ramira, who's saying that she's a Florida A&M University student studying environmental studies, and she lives in Tallahassee, and she's asking how she can get involved in her city with the CLEO Institute.
Thank you. It's so great that you live in Tallahassee. CLEO opened an office in Tallahassee there a few months ago. So we do have a dedicated team that brings in students as well as members of the public to become more civically engaged. So we have 2 staff members there, and we'd love to get you involved. So again, you can send us an info email. So it would be info@cleoinstitute.org, or you can check out our website. And they do a lot of civic advocacy because the state capitol is there, as well as get involved with all of the CLEO programs statewide.
Thank you. We have a question here from Victor, who's asking, how do scientists know or measure the amount of CO2 in the atmosphere going as far back as 800,000 years?
Oh my goodness, this is one of my favorite questions. It's something that I feel very excited about. What they do is they go up to the poles and they drill. They drill into the ice. And ice is similar to trees in some respects. So trees, you can tell how old they are by counting the amount of rings. And that way you can see like how long they've been on the planet. Well, with ice, you can do sort of similar. The deeper you get into the ice, so meaning like the deeper you go in terms of your ice core, the older the ice is, right? Because fresh ice in terms of snow is going to be at the top and deep ice is going to be at the bottom. Once they take out these ice cores, which are long cylindrical things of solid ice, they can slice that, and they can slice it into very thin pieces. And if you look at that under a microscope, you can count the number of bubbles that there are. And all of those bubbles indicate carbon dioxide concentrations, as well as other gases that were present in the atmosphere at that time. And so it's a really exciting prospect. If any of you are interested in a career someplace really, really cold and really pristine, you can definitely look up into doing that kind of thing and measuring carbon dioxide concentrations and studying how those changes have been. But essentially, they take thin slices of ice and they see the changes in the bubbles and the gases that are present in those ice.
Thanks, Julieta. This is a question for Dane. So Dane, maybe if you're still on the call, you could unmute yourself. The question is asking, do you think students are getting enough climate education across our state with the current science standards in the face of our current climate reality to prepare them for the future? Dane, are you there? Well, we'll come back.
Hi, sorry, yes, I am
there you
here.
are. Go for
on a
it.
conference call, so I may have missed the questions.
Oh, sure. I'll ask you again. Do you think that students are getting enough climate education in the state of Florida with the current science standards in the face of our current climate reality to prepare them for the future?
So like I mentioned a little bit earlier, us in Miami-Dade County Public Schools, we are making a concerted effort to make sure that topics important to the scientific community and the general public are part of our curriculum. So we have used the state standards to make specific attachments to topics like climate change. So as the middle school science supervisor, I'll talk about one of those examples in the middle school science course, one of the science courses. So we have a standard that roughly talks about the interactions of spheres of the earth. How does the hydrosphere, atmosphere, geosphere, biosphere, what are some things, what are they first of all, and how do they interact or have an impact on each other? So that's an easy one to say, well, clearly warming atmosphere has an impact on the hydrosphere, the waters, but that is sea level rise. So while the standards of our state don't specifically call out some of the climate science that we're discussing here, we as a district in Miami-Dade County Public Schools have made the effort to make our science standards sort of come to life in our neighborhood or in our current environment. So it's a fair assessment of our state standards to say there are things missing. The phrase climate science doesn't appear directly in our middle school standards, but we do have a standard that looks at understanding the difference between weather and climate, which was part of the early parts of this presentation started off with, well, what's the difference between weather and climate? And that's one of our science standards as well. And from the state level, the standard doesn't branch into some of the details of climate science that were presented here today, but those are things that as a district we do try to incorporate.
Thank you, Dane, for your answer. Appreciate that. Our next question is coming from, this is from Marvin asking if we're involved with any college programs such as the Ivy Tech program that deals with renewable energy. I know, Julieta, you already addressed what we do at CLEO in terms of engaging with the youth. I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
Sure. To my knowledge, we are not involved with Ivy Tech. However, you know, we'd be open to learning more about what that is.
You can always email info@cleoinstitute.org if you're interested in a collaboration or if you want to discuss a collaboration with us. So Marvin, please go ahead and send us an email if you're interested in sharing a little bit more with us.
Yes, so we do work with local universities. In South Florida, for instance, we work with Florida International University, the University of Miami, up in Tallahassee, and in our new office in Orlando. They're also collaborating with different universities. So please, you know, feel free to reach out and we can definitely share more information.
Great, thank you. This is a great question and really relevant to what's going on now. Asher is asking if we can talk a little bit more about the Trump rollbacks regarding the EPA standards.
Any context in particular?
No, just asking to maybe elaborate on them and explain them.
Sure. So in the simplest terms, the Trump administration has rolled back different measures over the last 3.5 years of the presidency that were initially meant to protect our water, our air, our land, and some of them dealt with efficiency standards for cars, some of them dealt with testing measures for our air and our water supplies to make sure that we have access to clean and safe air and water. So the latest rollbacks were in the news because the testing for some of our water and air programs have been halted as a result of the coronavirus pandemic, and many environmental organizations, along with the CLEO Institute, have signed letters and memos saying that, you know, these environmental protection measures do need to be kept in place regardless of the pandemic. And even because of the pandemic, we know that a coronavirus is an airborne disease, and there are links between protecting the quality of our air along with reducing the risk of airborne diseases. So if you'd like to get more involved about that, we definitely have program coordinators that can give you more information about what CLEO has been doing in terms of the Trump presidency.
Thank you, Julieta. Vanessa is asking if when we're referring to commission meetings and becoming more civically engaged, she's asking if we're referring to town hall meetings. Do you want to elaborate a little bit on what commission meetings look like here at the city and the county level?
Sure, and if you'd like, you can also put what city you're based in if you'd like to get more specific information about your specific municipality. But in essence, Florida is divided into different levels of government. So you have your municipality, which is the city you live in, like Miami Beach, the city of the city of Surfside, etc. You also have county commission meetings if you live in Miami-Dade County, Broward County, Orange County, etc. And then you have, commission meetings going up the levels of government and reaching into statewide meetings. What we advocate for members of the public to do, as well as students, is to reach out to your municipality to begin with and find out what issues they're talking about. So for instance, if you'd like to see more tree planting efforts in your community, that's something that you can propose at a commission meeting. If you'd like to see more climate efforts, and whether that looks in terms of hurricane resiliency or mitigation, more renewable energy investments, that's something that your commissioners have influence over and the ability to enact change. Commission meetings are very important also because we need more people to attend them. Going to commission meetings myself, you tend to see the same faces over and over. And what that means is that it's not representative of the general public at large. Commissioners really are there to serve the people, and that's why they were voted in to serve your interests and your needs. And if we need, as a community, more climate literacy, more climate resiliency, and more climate mitigation, then we can advocate for that. And if you're not able to go to a commission meeting in person, such as we're doing now because of health restrictions, you can always write letters to your commissioners, or you can wait until the pandemic ends and you can write letters, you can write emails, you can reach out to them on social media. Our Gen CLEO students have interacted with municipal mayors and commissioners through social media as well. So there are many platforms, but really just starting the conversation is important.
Thank you, Julieta. We have a question from Sergio asking if the Paris Accord actually does something about climate change. And he offers the example that carbon emissions in China and India have increased. I don't know if you want to speak a little bit about the Paris Accord in more detail and the importance and the symbolism of it.
Sure. So the Paris Accord, as far as I know, is not legally binding. Countries enter it in a good faith agreement, saying that they abide by these principles, they have the goal of reducing greenhouse gas emissions, and they're going to try their best with the resources that each country has to achieve that. In scale, like we know that there are smaller countries in terms of regional size, as well as financial capacity to incorporate these climate mitigation efforts. So it really is a symbolic effort, but the symbolism is important. We cannot negate the fact that the United States, for all intents and purposes, is considered a world superpower. And as a world superpower, we have a responsibility to be a leader, and particularly to be responsible for our own pollution. And yes, we have withdrawn from an agreement that was not legally binding, but there is something to be said about withdrawing from something that has a climate goal in mind. What that sometimes can be interpreted as on a global level is when we withdraw, we can say to the world that we're not as committed to achieving this. Now, there can be things done in public pressure to pressure administrations, regardless of which president it is, to rejoin the Paris Accord. Or we can also do a community effort to say, well, maybe we're not in the Paris Accord anymore, but we still want to achieve what the Paris Accord initially intended to do. And there are many municipalities and states that have done that. I recommend you look into the We Are Still In campaign. Those are organizations, corporations, and mayors and local elected officials who have committed, saying that, although we left the Paris Accord, we are still committed to do that in the capacity that we have.
Thank you, Julieta. And I just want to add that our withdrawal from the Paris Accord doesn't really become official until November 20th, I believe, and that's according to the stipulations of the Paris Agreement. So you know, we can be hopeful that something might change between now and November, but just wanted to put that out there. We do have an interesting question asking, this is from Daniela, who's asking what climate and environmental activists are doing to help spread the idea of fighting climate change to other countries. And since we're talking a lot about youth-led activism, perhaps you can talk a little bit about the Strike for Climate on Fridays that have gone global, Julieta.
Yes. You may be familiar with the Fridays for Future movement. It's an international group of students, largely inspired by Greta Thunberg, who is an activist from Sweden. And they do typically strikes every Friday outside of City Hall to raise awareness and demand action from their elected officials. And because of safety standards in light of this pandemic, they've had to move to them online. But in many cases, that has also amplified their reach. So I recommend you check out the online youth climate strikes. They have different hashtags like Climate Strike Online or Online Climate Strike, and you can see how to get involved with that. They are also tagging elected officials and asking for action. There are also people really passionate about education, just like the CLEO Institute. There are other organizations. We collaborate with many of them, like Extinction Rebellion and Fridays for Future, to spread the awareness, particularly among youth and the public at large. So that's a great way to get involved, is really just to start the conversation and get others educated and on board.
Thanks, Julieta. That was the last question that we had in the chat box. Would anyone else have any additional questions that they would like to ask? Give everyone a minute or two.
Sure. Again, remember that we will be sharing a copy, like a link to this recorded webinar if you'd like to reference it later. I do have a question. How can you plant trees in Florida? Don't you need government approval? Most of the time, yes, you do need government approval because they want to make sure that they are native trees, that they're not an invasive type. But that's something that, again, you can speak with your commissioners to find out the best process to do that. And maybe they can sponsor you with funding. Okay. So I'm going to give about 30 seconds for more questions, and then I'll close it off by inviting everyone to other CLEO initiatives that are happening this week. I'm going to give you just a few more seconds if you have any last minute questions.
We do. We actually have a question for Dane. I don't know if Dane is still on the call. Dane, a student is asking if you think public schools provide enough plant-based meals, which is a great question. I'm not sure if Dane is available. Let me see if I can.
Hi, so I am still here, and
Yes.
it's a great question that I really don't have much insight into, unfortunately. So my role on the curriculum side in the district doesn't overlap with our food and nutrition department that does the planning and providing of those meals. I know, I can't recall if it was last school year or maybe at the beginning of this school year, there was an initiative to have more, I guess, plant-based or vegetarian. I'm not sure what the labeling was on it at the time, but there was an initiative to get more options around healthy eating and plant-based diet available in schools. And that should have been an increase from, let's say, last year or 2 years ago. So I know that has happened just anecdotally by hearing about it, but I can't speak to any specific numbers or other activities around that from our food and nutrition department.
Dane, just as a follow-up, if a student was interested in asking for more plant-based meals at their cafeteria, who would they address these requests to if in a public school? Maybe he did not hear me. We do have a really good question here actually from Everett asking, how can we remain focused on climate change in a world that is now dominated by pandemics and their threat?
I'm so sorry. Could you repeat that question?
Sure. How can we remain focused on climate change in a world that is dominated by pandemics and their threat?
Thank you. That's definitely an important question, and one that CLEO has received a lot over these last 4 or 5 weeks that we've been really deep into the pandemic. Again, we never want to negate one crisis over the other or prioritize and say, you know, this crisis is more important than the other. We understand that the coronavirus is very important, and that's why we've taken measures as an organization to allow elected officials to really focus on giving the best service they can to their constituents and protecting them. So we've stopped, for instance, some of our student advocacy for the moment in terms of reaching out to elected officials, because we want to allow them the time and the mental space to really focus on the pandemic. However, we do want to acknowledge that climate crisis is a similar crisis in terms of scope. It's going to affect everybody, you know, regardless of income, of social strata, uh, racial background, regional background, gender, you know, religious creed. Climate change is a threat multiplier, and all of the issues that we are already facing have the potential to get worse as climate change intensifies. So, for instance, we're seeing many issues coming up now with unemployment as people are losing their jobs as a result of this pandemic. We can also see economic crises as a result of climate change intensifying and changing the way our food systems are ordered. If we start losing biodiversity, that's going to change the way much of our medicines are produced. In fact, much of our medicine and all of the technological achievements that come from that originate from the Amazon rainforest. And as we lose all of this precious biodiversity from the rainforest, we start to threaten the ability of pharmacies to produce life-saving medicines. We also want to acknowledge people's health. I mean, health is on everybody's mind right now as we try to stay safe and protect ourselves. But climate change also exacerbates respiratory issues. As we talked about, heat stroke also influences people, and many people die every year as a result of climate impacts. And it's predicted to get worse, especially as extreme weather is exacerbated, and that influences hurricanes as well as droughts and wildfires. So really, you know, both crises are important, and both crises can be solved by listening to the science and by heeding the science.
Thank you, Julieta. Dane was on mute earlier, but he said if any students are interested in lobbying their school to get more plant-based meals, he said the first person to reach out to would be your principal and the cafeteria manager. So if any of you are interested in bringing more plant-based meals to your school, that's who you would approach first. I don't see any other questions here. So Julieta, I don't know if you want to go ahead and wrap up and discuss a few of those more initiatives that CLEO has on the horizon this week.
Thank you. Definitely. So please check out cleoinstitute.org. There you're going to find our event calendar, which has all of our webinars for the next few weeks. If you enjoyed this presentation, we're going to be giving 2 more of these, one tomorrow and one on Wednesday. So please share that opportunity with other students, other teachers that you feel would benefit from this information. We have 2 opportunities over the next 2 days. We also have a webinar called Lessons from the Climate and COVID-19 Crises. So for that student who asked about coronavirus and how we can, you know, pay attention to that while also doing climate, that is definitely a place that would give you a lot more answers. So that's going to be held on Tuesday. Then on Wednesday, we have the same Earth Day webinar. And next Wednesday, we have Climate by Times 10, which is a climate change voyage through time. And that's a really fun visual overview of the climate situation from the perspective of timescales. So they go back by powers of 10. So how the climate looked like a year ago, how it looked 10 years ago, 100 years ago, and so on until the formation of the planet. So please check out our event calendar. You can also sign up for our Gen CLEO program. We have a virtual meetup on May 5th, where you can meet other students from middle school, high school, and university from across the state. And we plan activities, and we get to know each other and form friendships. Also, if you're interested in getting your school to be part of CLIP, please send us an email. And I'll send in for more information about the Earth Day contest. So again, it's a short video, less than a minute, or a short essay, less than 250 words, answering the question, on the 50th anniversary of Earth Day, what would you like to tell the world? And those submissions are due on Friday to our info email, which is info@cleoinstitute.org. We're going to be awarding a $50 prize to a zero waste store, and they have online shipping, so it's available all throughout Florida, as well as a chance to be invited to CLEO's youth-led climate podcast, which is called House on Fire. And it's a really exciting initiative, and we definitely encourage you to send your submissions. Check out the online climate strikes. CLEO is also going to be part of Earth Day Live, which is a 3-day live event hosted by over 400 organizations. You can find more information about that on our website. And definitely tune in, see some live streams, listen to some good music, and get inspired by everybody that's coming together virtually to enact change and really make a positive difference in the world. And have a happy Earth Week. Remember to stay safe, and always reach out if you have any more questions. Olivia, anything else you would like to share?
No, thank you, Julieta. So I don't see any more questions. And again, I echo what Julieta said. We wish you all a good and safe week. And we hope to see you on some of our upcoming webinars this week as well.
Yes, please keep an eye out for your emails. I'll be sharing information about all of these events, as well as ways to get involved politically, like the Florida Climate Pledge, which CLEO owns. It's a way to contact your elected officials. And we'd love to see you again in one of our programs.
Thank you, everyone, and have a great afternoon.
Goodbye.